Welcome to our very first video update for the United States of East Anglia film project. Now, of course, normally we would love to be out in the sunshine doing this sort of thing from, I don't know, a location where we've been doing some filming or maybe some interviews. But of course, in these strange times of lockdown and social isolation, we can't be doing that. So we thought we'd adopt what's becoming the new normal and do it via the internet using Zoom. And our guest today is Barbara Campbell from the United States. So we met Barbara through the United States of East Anglia Facebook page, which we set up just a couple of weeks ago. And in fact, we've invited Barbara to become part of the programme. More about that later on. But in the interim, we thought it would be really nice to introduce her and do a little bit of a video interview with her right now. So I'm going to hand over to Maggie. What's our first topic, Maggie?
Well, I'd like to ask Barbara, what sparked your interest, Barbara? What's the background to Barbara and the Eighth in the East?
Dad always had a plane, so we always were used to flying on a single plane. He and Mom had a wonderful life, flying everywhere, and we took that for granted. And so we never really discussed about the war. And that generation, as we know, were very quiet about that. My dad got Alzheimer's early in his 50s and passed away. And then as my mom started to get older, I started taking all Dad's love letters during the war after they had met, plus reading her diary, which she had kept. But again, I still was doing this more for Mom. It wasn't till she passed away at almost 100 years of age that I really started going through. I had inherited all of their paperwork, all of the diaries, all of the Red Cross patches and his Air Force patches and the certificates, all of the paperwork. That's what started me with this. And unfortunately, as my generation know, we didn't ask our parents when they were still here. So I'm trying to piece all these little wonderful journeys that they had together.
When we look back at that era, one of the aircraft types that is always synonymous with that, it flew out of East Anglia in large numbers, but also in many other parts of the UK and other parts of the world, was of course the B-17 bomber. And I know that you took a pleasure flight in more recent years in a B-17 bomber. Could you tell us about that?
Well, so the fellow that I've been dating found out, he lived south from me, and found out that this Collins Foundation were providing people rides. And so there was a fighter jet, and then there was a B-17 called the 909. And so, are you kidding? I was so excited to get on it. So we went up on the plane. It's a half an hour ride. It was worth every dollar, and everybody that was on that flight, their family, mostly obviously the men, were the ones who flew the B-17. So they were there to understand that piece of history that our family went through. It was most exciting, even though it was a half an hour. As we took off, I got to sit where my mother's cousin, he was a radio operator. I got to see the plywood that was on the floor, which you can't believe that's all there was. The windows were all out. Of course, they were plexiglass. I walked the plank that goes between the radio operator's room and the pilots, that where the bombs drop. It can't be 12 inches that you had to walk across to get to the front of the plane. And then the best part was sitting in the bombardier's seat that overlooks, and all I could picture myself was the flak coming up at these guys.
What was the most surprising thing, or the most surprising things, Barbara, that you've discovered about over here? I know that we've talked privately, and you mentioned the signposts, the signposts being taken down, and also the size of this area, this country.
Well, I know that one of the things I read is when the pilots had to, so most of that, including my dad, when they were getting their basic and their advanced flights, they're flying over Texas. The weather was perfect. It was flat. So when they said that they could drop a bomb in a pickle barrel, well, they could do that in Texas. But when they got to England, and everything was like a patchwork quilt, and And of course, the biggest part that every book that I read, everything that my mother and father said, it was the weather. And that weather was so destructive to all the missions that they took. And you think about when you're taking off, and they started with maybe 13 planes to where they got 1,000 planes eventually. They had to get up in a formation with all the weather as bad as it was, and try to get to the targets they were getting to, and then to come back home. They may not have had gas. They may have blown out, 2 of the engines, and they're trying to just get back to England. It was amazing how fast I'm sure they grew up.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, and thank you for your time today. We should.
My pleasure.
Our pleasure, I have to say. Right at the
Yeah.
beginning, we mentioned that we're hoping to include you in the programme and do more with you, and of course that's something which we'll post on the Facebook page as we progress, and we've got more arrangements in. So, but that's definitely something that we'd like to do, a proper interview. This is the interview for here and now, so that we can hopefully reach other people and encourage other people with good stories to come along as well. And we would, if you're viewing this through YouTube or through one of the websites rather than coming across our Facebook page, then I would urge you to visit. It's the United States of East Anglia, and if you are a regular visitor already, then please don't forget to like the page and follow the page, and then you'll get all the regular updates, and hopefully in the fullness of time more short interviews like this. So once again, before we sign off, thank you very much indeed, Barbara, for joining us from the United States.
My pleasure, believe me.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see you
you,
again
Barbara.
soon. Bye for now.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care, and everybody who's viewing, stay safe. Bye bye.